grew up in the South, came to New York in his teens, and basically by his early 20s was starting to become known as a short story writer, be published in the early mid-20s, and he became a very kind of high-profile, respectable writer in the New York City kind of / Europe scene, and because of his personality and his gregariousness with people, and he became quite a beloved personality, and people wanted him to be at events or parties or places just because of the way he was, on top of his talent as a writer. But really what made his name was his talent as a writer, and that's why he was kind of a rare breed at that time, somebody who actually had extraordinary talent as an artist, but also as an extraordinary personality.
I got to know him several years later when I was writing profiles of writers for Esquire and The Atlantic magazine. Truman was the most famous writer in the world after In Cold Blood. He could go anywhere he wanted. We would go to restaurants and he would always get the very best table in the very best restaurants. And I thought, boy, what a lark this is going to be. Lots of great wine, vintage wine, and lunches and dinners, and it'll be over in 2 years, and I'll have a great time doing it. What I didn't know, and what Truman didn't know, was at the time I was starting, Truman was beginning his long downfall. Something that he did in Cold Blood just wrecked his life forever. It was his greatest success, and yet it was his greatest failure in a way. Truman was a wonderful writer, but he was also a fascinating human being. Truman was more fun to be around than anyone else I've ever met, and I've met some famous people. He took a great interest in everything and everybody. When you were talking to Truman, it was as if you were the most important person in the world. And he wasn't putting a show on. He was really fascinated by people. And that's what made his work so great. That's what made In Cold Blood so great, because he was fascinated by people. And he became fascinated by the people in this little tiny town in Kansas.
Well, I came to know so many people there that I wouldn't have known under any other circumstance in my life, and came to like them a great deal, and made many, many friends there. And one of the things that was especially helpful to me was to find that it was possible for me to make really deep and lasting friendships with people who weren't necessarily, that we weren't on the same wavelengths of sensitivity at all, you know? I mean, since I was, I've been what, in the literary world since I was 17 years old.
Truman became attached to all the people involved in Cold Blood. The detective, Al Dewey, and his wife Marie, their children, their 2 boys. He had a terrible time at the beginning in Kansas. They were very wary of this odd-looking fellow coming in from New York. But after a few weeks, he won them over. And when he returned to New York, he said, well, at first it was hard, but now I'm practically the mayor of the town. And he was.
Richard Avedon had been in Kansas at the invitation of Capote with his camera, and photographed the murderers and the Deweys and the KBI agents and all over Garden City and Holcomb, and went to that Dewey house, went to the Clutter home.
Seeing the chronology of the photographs is really key to understanding. Like, it makes it feel so much less precious. Like, it's not a photograph, it's a day in which he followed these guys around and documented them. And all the pictures are good, but some of them are just, you know, you could tell that he didn't know what was going to happen.
He also became very much attached to the 2 killers, particularly Perry Smith, who had had a bad childhood, just as Truman had had. And Perry's was much worse than Truman's was, but still they had bad childhoods, lonely childhoods. And he could relate to that, and Perry could relate to him. So they had a very interesting relationship, and it was very hard for Truman in the sense that he became attached to Perry, but he also wanted them dead. He wanted them executed so he could finish his book.
The epigraph that he chose for his last book that he'd never finished was "More tears are shed over answered prayers than unanswered ones," and I think that was true in his life. I mean, that was abundantly true in his life. He wanted nothing but for these guys to die so he could finish his book, and that killed him eventually.
Truman was the most unusual writer possibly in American history, in the sense that he was a character unlike any other. Nobody could have invented Truman. I talked to Truman just a few weeks before he died in 1984, and he said, "There's the one and only TC. There's never been anybody like me, and there ain't going to be anybody like me again, and God knows that's for sure."
June's dead. Frank shot himself. Now Perry did what he did. I used to love him. He was my little doll. He scares me now.
When was the last time you saw him?
10 years ago.
10 years. Could I borrow one of these pictures?
Take the whole thing. I don't want them anymore. Don't be taken in by my brother. He's got this sensitive side he'll show. You believe he's gentle and so easily hurt, but he'd just as soon kill you as shake your hand. I believe that.
Hello, Nancy. What's the name of your book? What's the name of your book? I don't know what you're talking about. Truman Capote read last night before a packed audience from his nonfiction book, In Cold Blood. The true crime novel tells of killers Richard Hickok and Perry Smith, who brutally murdered a Kansas family 3 years ago. Who sent that to you? It's not your goddamn business. It is my business because it's not true. The organizers of the reading needed a title. They picked one. A sensational one, I admit, to attract a crowd. They picked it? Yes. It's not your title. Harry, I haven't chosen one yet. How could I choose a title when we still haven't talked about that night? How could I? I couldn't. Possibly. You pretend to be my friend. I'm sorry. I should have told you. I couldn't pretend to be your friend. And the truth is, I can't help wanting to be. You don't have to tell me anything. If you don't want to. I have something from your sister. She misses you. Look at my belly. There must be something wrong with us to do what we did. We heard there was $10,000 in that house. Once we tied up everybody and searched all over, I knew the guy told us about it was wrong. There was no money. Dick wouldn't believe it, so he went tearing through the house, banging on the walls, looking for a safe. When he was done, he said he was going to go up to Nancy's room and have his way with her. I wouldn't allow it. I told him that. So I sat with her. Dick came up and got me. We turned off the lights and went down to the basement, to where Mr. Clutter and the boy was. He kept saying no witnesses, but I figured if I waited him out, he'd give up and we'd leave him tied up there. And we'd drive all night, they'd never find us. We tied Mr. Clutter's wrist to a pipe over his head. And he looked hurt, so I cut him down. I put a box out there so he'd be more comfortable. He asked how his wife and daughter was, and I said they were fine. And they were getting ready for sleep, and it wouldn't be long till morning when they'd find them. And he was just looking at me, looking into my eyes, like he expects me to kill him. Like he expects me to be the kind of person who would kill him. I was thinking this nice man scared of me. I was so ashamed. I mean, I thought he was a very nice gentleman. And I thought so right up till I slit his throat. I didn't know what I did till I heard the sound. Add it up. How much money did you get from the Clutters that night? Between $40 and $50.